Good evening and welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Honolulu's weekly Tuesday Pau Hana that we enjoy every week here. It's a wonderful time for us to be together, and this is one of our special days when we have someone with us from the community, an organizer and a teacher and an activist and someone I've seen, a lobbyist of sorts that I've seen in the streets as well as in the legislative rooms over at the ledge. Those are the kind of folks I like to hang with. So I'm really happy to introduce Nate Hicks from Living Wage Hawaii. Nate, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and Living Wage Hawaii real quick?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. I really do appreciate it. Being able to, talk about what's going on. So, yeah, I'm Nate Hicks. I'm with Living Wage Hawaii. We're a local group aiming to make sure that the minimum wage is at least a livable wage for residents here in Hawaii. A lot of us know the cost of living is through the roof, and it's really hard for a lot of people to make ends meet. Across the nation, you've seen Democrats really push the $15 or higher minimum wage conversation. And that makes sense for a lot of places, right? California, New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois, numbers of states are already on their way to 15. And cost of living here is even higher than that. Cost of living here for a full-time worker is about $17 an hour. But our minimum wage is stuck at $10.10 an hour. And we have no plans or legislation in process to raise the minimum wage. And so for me and our group, we feel that this is just egregious. At least at the bare minimum, full-time workers should be able to just afford at least their basic needs. And so that's the focus of our group. We've been fighting for a little over 2 years now, unsuccessfully, unfortunately. But we are growing the movement, and so we're hopeful and going to continue to fight and hopefully bring more folks into the fold to help us win. This election obviously is going to be a big one, trying to get more allies in the legislature to keep pressure on making this change, but we'll see how it goes. So I guess, yeah, that's the short of it, I suppose.
Great. Thanks, Nate. Yeah, I want to, one of the things that our congregation, I know individuals have been asking me about is moving their justice work and justice seeking work from sort of church sponsored and church gathered kind of ideas and finding other ways to be active kind of on their own that maybe doesn't have the church involved. Can you say something about your organization, how people join it, what kinds of volunteers are there, and what kind of needs you maybe have, or the kinds of folks that that you're looking for?
Yeah, we're always looking for more people to join. Always super excited when we have more people that are interested. And right now, easy way to join is to go to livingwagehawaii.com and just add your email address so that you're on our mailing list, so you'll stay in contact. We rarely send emails, honestly, only when they're pertinent. So, once a month or something like that. But otherwise, we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Living Wage HI. You can find us there. But yeah, in terms of being able to be involved, oftentimes we spend a lot of our efforts really focused on legislative action. So contacting our representative is always big. Contacting Speaker Psyche, contacting Senator Ron Kochi, it really goes a long way. You hear oftentimes in the media or things like that we had hundreds of people reach out, and it really gives a big push to our efforts. And also we'll do some actions, right? We'll do marches, we'll do rallies, and we'll show out in force with our Living Wage Hawaii tees. And that can really show a good message, get some media attention around our efforts. The more numbers we have, the more visible it is, the more important it seems. And that's how democracy works, right? Legislators who are apathetic towards our efforts are going to continue to push us to the side and kick the minimum wage issue down the road if they don't think that there is a big movement behind us, right? If they think it's just me always in the paper or writing them, they can, not pay attention. But if we have a large number of people who are engaged and constantly calling and emailing and showing up to these events, it really does make a huge difference. So that's probably the primary method in which we try to stay involved.
Thanks, Nate. Yeah, that's good to know. Maybe we'll visit that again because I see some people joining a little bit late, and we'll come back to that maybe at the end of our chat. But one of the things that I've noticed about Living Wage Hawaii, and we can get to some of the other things, is that I think it's I've met, or at least been in contact with the gentleman who handles your web presence, and he seems extremely adept at getting in touch with people, getting stuff up on the internet. Also, so he's very, pretty savvy. And also, your t-shirts are beautiful. Like, they're really well designed, very simple. And when I wear it out, it's what I get the most comments on. Can you say something? I know you talked about this is just politics, but I feel like your organization, whether it's more streamlined or whether it's younger people or more skilled people, or how it works, but I've also noticed the same thing about your communication strategy. I only hear from you when it matters, whereas other people, I get like weekly emails that I just kind of like lose. Can you say something about the philosophy of Living Wage Hawaii and why you think it maybe feels different for someone in a position like me who's getting a lot of these things, but that why yours kind of stands out? Can you say anything about that?
Well, I appreciate you saying that. That is obviously music to my ears. But our goal from the start is action, right? We need action. And the beautiful thing about our group is we're not, and this isn't to knock on any other group in the least, but the nice thing about us is it's a passion project for everybody that's involved. None of us are workers. We're not getting paid to be here. We're not, sustaining our livelihoods on this. It's not immediately apparent that we need to just fundraise or just do actions to keep the lights on. We're sole focused is trying to raise the minimum wage, and that's it. And so we have the leeway, we have the ability to put all of our eggs in that basket, and you're not going to see a lot of busy work. You're not going to see people just doing things to do them. You're only going to see things that we think are going to be the most impactful, right? We're not going to come in and volunteer to waste our time or anybody else's. And so for that, I think is why you're getting the response or getting the feeling that you're getting. And I know me personally, I always feel bombarded with emails, and so I make sure that we're not one of those groups. We want to be very clear that we're only going to reach out to you when it's absolutely necessary and when we think that it's going to matter. So that's our strategy. And obviously, by no means am I some like savant with this stuff. We just throw stuff at the wall and sees what sticks, and stuff that doesn't work, we'll kick it to the curb. And if it's successful, we'll keep at it. So trial and error and just a general passion and desire to make change, I'd say is the biggest difference.
Very cool. So tell me, why is it a passion project for you? What is it that is, it's something I ask my friends, like, I have a lot of friends who they're like, I do stuff, but I don't have like a passion for anything. And I'm always like, well, find something that, that is a passion for you. So why is this a passion for you?
That's a good question. I mean, I've always been interested in, living in a just society. I think that's just, maybe the benefits of, how I was raised is, my parents were always fair and just, and, being in a fair society was always important to me. And I do remember when I had learned that the minimum wage, just in general, I'm from Minnesota originally, and so this isn't just specifically to here, but when I learned that the minimum wage in Minnesota was less than enough to make ends meet, and this is while I'm like in high school or college or something like that, and I'm like, my eyes are being opened to the bigger world around me. I'm sitting here like, are you kidding me? One of the wealthiest countries in the history of the world, and we are just not even letting our workers survive. They can't afford basic needs. It was just so mind-blowing to me. I literally couldn't imagine it. It was like, something has to be wrong. I'm missing something. This can't be true. And so I remember, figuring that out, and it was just so mind-boggling to me. And I didn't do anything right away. I'm still just, chugging along and reasonably interested in politics, but nothing substantial. And then I moved out here 7 years ago now. And obviously the cost of living is through the roof. And I also recognized, I was like, if I was mad about the differential between the living wage and the minimum wage in Minnesota, this is the worst. It's like unbelievable. And so, I still didn't do anything right away. It wasn't something, I didn't move here and just start doing stuff, but I started being more involved in some of the local groups. And I recognized that unlike in other states where there's major union support for raising the minimum wage, the SEIU, Service Employees Union, I think, they are one of the major pushes, one of the major fighters for raising the minimum wage. The Fight for 15 is really an effort by these, professional organizers, these people who can organize and get unions out and get thousands of people to show up to their rallies, no problem. We don't have that. We don't have an SEIU chapter, and we don't have any union that's really, really focused on raising the wage. I will give credit to Unite Here Local 5. They do an excellent job. And so they've been an excellent ally, but it's not something that is their mission. They don't go out and say, we need to raise the minimum wage. And so in learning this and learning about the other advocacy groups that exist, I realized there was a gaping hole for a dedicated organization or group of people that really wants to make this their focus. And so finding out that, A, I was appalled that it existed, and B, there was nobody that was really stepping up to the plate to do it. I just decided, okay, I can either be frustrated for the rest of my life about this, or I can do something about it. And so as somebody is interested and, reasonably passionate about it to begin with, it just sort of seemed like I have to do something. And fortunately, I have a great friend group who was pretty much in the same boat too, politically involved and really passionate about this stuff. We would be texting each other all the time, like, I cannot believe this is going on, right? How embarrassing. We have a legislature full of Democrats, and yet we're doing nothing. They say one thing and do another. And so we were like, we're skilled, we're talented. We have, communications background, financial background, marketing background. We have the, we think we talk about with each other like we know what we're talking about, so might as well put our money where our mouth is and do something about it. So that's where it really comes from. And again, I really care. I would love to live in a society where you're not worried about your neighbor's financial security. You're not worried about your own financial security. I think there's a huge benefit to all of us, not just for those workers, but being able to go to a restaurant and not worry about the person serving you, whether they're making ends meet. So again, I really do care. I think it's really important, and also I'm capable of helping. So I guess that's it.
So a lot of folks have like their alter ego that they do their day job, their Clark Kent job. What is it you do? I mean, I know the answer, so it's a leading question. What is it you do during your day job, Mr.?
I'm a high school math teacher, so.
All right. We have a lot of teachers on the call, so you're in good company. Now, I'm not going to switch myself because that's a question of sort of about math. Like I'm guessing you understand numbers probably better than I do. Can you tell us something about the number of people who are actually working at 1010 or thereabout? Or I don't know. Maybe you could talk about the numbers a little bit, and then I got to follow up on that.
Yeah. So, I do know a lot of people are very interested in how many are making exactly 1010, and I get it. It's a very marketable number to attach it to because that is the minimum wage. But I think a better way to look at this scenario is look at how many people are making less than a living wage, right? People who are making $10.11 an hour are still super struggling. That extra penny is no different. People at $11 an hour, $12, $13, $14 an hour, although they're not making exactly the minimum, they still are struggling, right? And so the exact number of people making above working full time and making less than a living wage is very high. I don't know the exact number, but it's something like 180 or 200,000 people. So, and that obviously is for themselves that are struggling. And also if they have family members, like if they have children, those people are struggling. So the number of people in Hawaii who are unable to really just be comfortable off a full-time job is humongous. So yeah,
And
but yes,
and
I do know the numbers, and I'm happy to talk about them.
I didn't want to step on this area, but it's one of the things I found really interesting is that is really starting to change my thinking from what the minimum wage is to what a living wage is, but then also how, I'm sorry, someone's got some background noise going on. I'm not sure who it is, so I'm just going to start muting people and figure out if we can get it from there. All right, I think we got it. So the question to me is like, I met guys when I was planning for the Poor People's Campaign who they were making a living wage, or they were making ends meet because they were working 3 jobs. And
Right.
so can you say something about like the earning versus like one, I've seen a lot, one job should be enough, so can you frame the question on what it takes, like what it takes to live in Hawaii with one full-time job working, a reasonable number of hours? I know that's something we see a lot.
Yeah. So again, a full-time worker would need to make at least $17 an hour to afford their basic needs here. At the minimum wage of 10.10, that would mean you would need to work pretty much 70% more than what you're working. So you're talking, what's that like? You'd have to work like 67 hours or something at minimum wage to be able to afford food, shelter, clothing, which is just insane. I don't think any of us want to live in a society where the least fortunate amongst us are putting in 70-hour weeks. That's just bogus,
And that's
right?
and that's for an individual, not a family, right?
Correct.
Right.
So that would be a
Right.
single person just trying to take care of themselves. If you have a 2-worker household with 2 kids, that number is even higher.
Yeah,
So,
way higher.
um,
Yeah.
yeah. So any way you cut it, regardless of who you're looking after, and if you're a single parent, it's insane, right? At no level is the minimum wage anywhere close to what it needs to be to take care of yourself. So, um, yeah, it's just mind blowing. Especially we live in a place where we have an abundant resource of tourism. Obviously now, given the pandemic, that's not really the case. But of all of the money that is being poured into this place, $17 billion of tourism money. People are spending $200, $300, $400, $500, $600 per night to stay in a hotel, and the people that are serving them at the restaurant, at the hotel bar, are working 3 jobs, or are struggling, or sleeping, or staying at their parents' house. Right. The irony of it, the extreme differences are just insane. Right. These are sort of the image that we imagine, like these poor third world countries existing, right, where you have these secluded resorts in some poor island, and obviously, okay, the local community is there because it's a poor place. But this is Hawaii. We have luxurious things across the board, but yet the least fortunate amongst us are still struggling. So it's just completely backwards. I don't know how much louder I can say it, but yeah, it's just crazy.
So that brings me to a question. There's some questions kind of popping up in the chat here, and we'll get to that. I see one question from Jill and Mike. Do all restaurants in Hawaii pay their servers a salary? In other words, how does one know if servers depend almost completely on tips or if they're getting a real salary? My understanding is that very few restaurants in Hawaii pay a salary. They're almost that's a very
Yeah.
tiny little group of very fancy restaurants in New York City that Danny Meyer owns that started a process of paying waiters a salary. They all depend on tips. It might be pooled and it might be, however, but for instance, a Cheesecake Factory, I know people make roughly with tips, they're making about 30 to 32 or 33 a year as a server at the most successful restaurant in the state. But that's a standout kind of place. So, all right. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about real quick is you said something really interesting, which is I can scream it as much as I want and get it out there. So, man, I've been in those hearings in the finance committee and other committees where like 50 of us will show up and like make like sort of outpouring testimony. Like if I was a judge and a jury, like the evidence is overwhelming that it should change, and then like maybe two small business owners will complain that like if you do this, I can't sell gelato, and then it doesn't happen. So like to me, it's like living in upside down world. And so can you talk about, I see you nodding, and because I want you to talk about that frustration, because if I'm feeling it, you must really be feeling it. So
Yeah, it's insane. Being involved over the last several years, you just sort of notice the politics of everything that happens. And, for a lot of people, they kind of just poo-poo it. Oh, that's just politics. And, and maybe I was naive for thinking that we might live in some sort of just society. But the reality is, we have politicians in power who have no interest in raising the minimum wage. They just do not feel that this is a important thing to do. And they likely have significant pressure, financial pressure behind them saying no, right? Oftentimes across the nation, across the world, you have a lot of people pushing politicians to do stuff. And it normally comes from people with money. We don't have money to push politicians to do stuff, right? All we have is people. All we have is man hours, right? I'm not going to sit here and say 100% that they're all corrupt and they're only responding to their financial interests, but the proof is in the pudding. They are not acting on behalf of the Democratic Party. They're not acting on behalf of the people. They're not acting on behalf of those who need help. Their actions are flying in the face of all the data that we have, state data. These are not even my numbers that I'm saying they're throwing their nose at. It's their own state data that shows, the raising the minimum wage has done nothing but help our economy. It's done nothing but help the workers. It is always a benefit. Across the board, business was booming while we were raising the minimum wage. And so the only conclusion I can come from is that these legislators really are not interested in helping this cause at all. And it's incredibly frustrating. And oftentimes, a lot of our efforts that are on this advocacy movement, because I know minimum wage is obviously something that I'm super passionate about, and that I think has got to be at the top of the list. And actually the Democratic Party feels the same way. Raising the minimum wage was the Democratic Party's #1 priority for 2 years in a row now. And so again, this is like a huge deal. But there are other efforts that are also important that the legislature thumbs their nose at. So it's incredibly frustrating. You have a House that is 51 people, and a lot of people say that it is a very top-down chamber, right? It does not have, each individual representative does not have a big voice. Leadership comes around, gets their decisions, and say, hey, this is what we're going to do, right? Scott Psyche is the Speaker of the House, Sylvia Luke is the Finance Chair, and them and their friends sort of get together and make the decisions pretty much on their own and pass it down. I know there is some conversation, but oftentimes the people that are the most supportive of these efforts are kind of pushed to the side. So it's incredibly frustrating. I don't have an answer, right? The most hopeful thing that is coming soon would be these elections, right? If we can get more people who are really outspoken and are willing to stand up to the current leadership, that would be a big help. We have very few allies in the Capitol building that are really willing to stand up to leadership and say what's on their mind. I would have to give a huge amount of credit to Amy Peruso, Tina Wildberger, and Russell Ruderman for standing up and saying, we need this now. These decisions by leadership are unacceptable, but they're very few in numbers. You don't have a block of a large group of vocal legislators that are willing to stand up. And so it's difficult for them too. There are tons of fights that they're having to fight, and minimum wage isn't the only one. And so it's always a pick your battle for these people that are truly trying to represent the interests of the people. So I wish I had better news, like, if we only had 10 more calls, that would have tipped the scales. But, unless we have significant constant pressure, the legislature will be very remiss to act. Another bright spot is you've seen all of the outpouring of support for the George Floyd protests, right? Going into this new legislative session, the Legislators were always saying, we're only going to pass COVID bills, only COVID related bills. Nothing else is going to cross our chamber's desk, which is an easy out for them. They're like, we don't want responsibility. We want to be able to kill every bill because we don't really care that much. We're only wanting to do COVID related bills. And then this nationwide movement, civil rights, racial justice movement happened. And all of a sudden the media spotlight turned, and it was like, hey, Hawaii's criminal justice system is really messed up. If George Floyd had been murdered here, we wouldn't even know the name of the officer who did it. Hawaii's laws are so backwards that the transparency doesn't exist, let alone any accountability for the person, because you wouldn't even know who did it. And so, again, huge praise to Civil Beat and Anita Hofschneider in particular, the reporter there, for continuing to pump this stuff out and continuing to shine a spotlight and interview and really get down to the nitty gritty of it. And fortunately, the legislature said, hey, we see all this pressure, we see all of this attention, we'll pass this bill of transparency, right? When there is a significant amount of media attention, when there's a significant amount of public outcry, you will get them to reluctantly bend. And so that is what we need to start. And fortunately, going into this legislative session, the legislature had sort of bent a little bit on the minimum wage issue, and they came out at the beginning of the year saying, hey, we know that $17 is a living wage. We know that the Democratic Party platform is $15 an hour. We know that most of our chamber's legislators individually say they support these things, but what we're going to do is we're going to give you $13 an hour, and that's it. And so it's clear from the get-go, just by that as their opening movement is like, you know, all that stuff we were saying for years that we actually support this but didn't pass it, it was just a lie because we don't want to, and we're just going to give you 13. And it's not even $1 a year. It was spread out over 4 years. So it would be $13 an hour by 2024. And so if that's not enough evidence for you to say that this legislature is completely against a real substantial change to help us, I don't know what is. And so then COVID happened, and that was their opening they needed. Hey, the economy is in shambles. We're all focused on COVID. We aren't going to pass a minimum wage, and there's nothing you guys can do about it because there's so much media attention on other things. The ability to organize, the ability to be active. The labor unions and us, we can't turn out 100 people at the legislature anymore because we're all at stay-at-home orders, right? And so, yeah, they took this opportunity and they killed it. So the initial opening, their primary vocal bill, their number one priority of this year to raise the minimum wage to 13, just got scrapped. So incredibly frustrating. And I wish, again, I had more answers. But again, the best I could say is we need better legislators in there to push back on these people, because if we don't get it, they're going to be continued to be happy until there's more pressure.
Thanks, Nate. And I don't want to take this in a whole different direction, but just I have watched my friends who work for low wages over the last, who've been laid off, who've been receiving in benefits from the federal government more than they were making really on a minimum wage. Maybe for the first time in a long time making a living wage in Hawaii. And the general overall health of these people has grown over these months in ways that is literally visible to the naked eye. Like their calmness, their demeanor, their ability, they're feeding themselves better. It's been amazing to watch. And so is there any kind of movement, and I don't want to say UBI, although I believe in universal basic income. Even my dad, which is, I shouldn't say this, he's going to want to watch this, is starting to believe in universal basic income. And so can you say something about what has happened over the last few months, if you've noticed anything, or if that's been helpful at all? I'm just talking what I've seen, and it's starting to really sink in that some kind of movement is needed for just general public health. So
yeah, I think nationwide that conversation is already happening, right? I agree. You've heard all these stories of people are like, oh my goodness, like I feel free, I feel happy, I feel, provided for and all of this. And, especially in Hawaii, like you said, the minimum wage job is putting people on the streets. How stressful would that be? I mean, I couldn't handle, unable to make my ends meet. And the evidence is crystal clear, right? Poverty has chronic, um, is chronically dangerous to people. A year of poverty will take off years of your life just by having to deal with all that stress. And so I'm very hopeful. I would love to see a basic income get passed. Nationally, that conversation is beginning, right? Andrew Yang had, I think, been a great advocate for it on the presidential campaign. And actually, we had passed a study however many years ago here in Hawaii studying what the impacts of a basic income would be. If the question is regarding what is going to happen here, I would say we are going to go kicking and screaming, right? There's just no way. But yeah, hopefully the nationwide conversation begins, and I will give. And I'm not going to sit here and say all that the legislature does is bad. There are a lot of good things that do come out of that building. So fortunately, they did increase the unemployment benefits for local state unemployment by $100, which is a huge, huge help, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm hopeful that this can be maintained, but who knows really? That's all.
Okay. We have a question here from Liz about it's I don't know where the numbers are from, but just that she says the average small business owner makes $49,000 a year. At a 60-hour work week, that breaks down to 16 an hour. And then questions about a small business model so that paying $17 an hour to employees could work. I have issues. I have answers around controlling the equity in the building or the business, and there's a lot of other value that may not translate in those simple numbers that we could talk about, Liz. But I just wanted to kick it to Nate to get his take on that.
Yeah, and I appreciate this discussion because it comes up all the time. Nobody wants to raise the minimum wage and then have these small businesses go under. That would be the exact opposite, right? The workers are trying to help work at these small businesses, right? They'd all lose their jobs. Right. Like, yeah, it's not a functional model if we're trying to run these businesses out of. And at no point do I want to come off as being someone who's trying to attack these businesses that are paying low wages. Like, the reality of the scenario is you're in a capitalistic society. You need to be able to pay your workers a wage that you can afford, right? If you are going to pay, if your competitor is paying $10.10 for workers, and you, out of the goodness of your heart, are paying 17, you're going to have to raise your prices for your goods, right? Two competing sandwich shops. Odds are, if you're just the average consumer and the products are the same, you're going to go to the business with less cost for the sandwiches, right? That's just how our economy works. And again, so there's no shame being thrown at the small businesses. Everybody's trying to do what they need to do to survive. But this is the benefit of raising the minimum wage, is it puts everybody on an even playing field, right? We're not advocating for $17 an hour tomorrow. That would be complete bonkers. It would break the economy and everybody would be unemployed. A gradual, slow increase in the minimum wage, which has been happening throughout history for the last 50 years, or 70 years since the inception of the minimum wage. It's shown to be effective, right? We've done it in Hawaii several times. The nation has done it. If we were at $10.10 today this year, if we move the minimum wage to 11 next year, that's something that small businesses can handle. If they need to increase their prices to adjust, they can. And evidence shows that for every dollar increase in the minimum wage, you would only need to increase your price of goods to fully compensate for the raise would be by about 2%. And so a $7 poke bowl, let's say you're selling this year, you would have to sell it for $7.14 next year, right? Completely reasonable. And the data shows, right, when you poll people, you say, hey, are you willing to pay a bit more to make sure that the person that is working is paid a living wage? Everybody's like, yeah, of course, right? I'm not going to be throwing a fit over another 14 cents on my poke bowl. Like, who cares? Like, I don't want that person to be poor and I have 14 cents, right? So again, getting to $17 will take years and years and years, and it will be a slow, gradual increase. But again, the data shows that when you do this small increase, everybody can start paying a fair wage. And fortunately, right, small business owners are struggling. They're putting all this time too, right? Their ability to succeed will grow as well, right? If the minimum wage were $17 an hour, let's say 7 years down the line, if they as small business owners aren't they should be easily being able to make $17 an hour themselves, right? It's a method that helps everybody. Everybody gets lifted up by these small changes over time, right? You just sort of raise that little floor up and make sure that at the bare minimum you're making ends meet. Then everybody else has to go up from there. The reality is with this super low minimum wage, you have hundreds of thousands of workers making less than 17. And so people with education, people with experience, once they climb that ladder from $10 up, they might have gotten, a $7 raise over the course, and they're still just surviving, right? And so this is the model that, can help everybody, small businesses, low income workers, medium income workers. It's just sort of how it goes. And this evidence is shown in countries across the world, right? The minimum wage in Australia, a worker only needs to work 30 hours a week to afford their basic needs, right? Same in New Zealand, right? Minimum wage in New Zealand's $18 an hour. And their small businesses are thriving, their unemployment rates are super low. So the evidence is there that this definitely does work.
Yeah, a cogent comment from Joan. It makes no sense to set minimum wages without tying it to cost of living. Amen.
Yeah, 100%.
And there's a wonderful thought here from Lee. I just want to add, before we get to that question, I want to add one thing to the economic analysis of small businesses. I've been a small business owner myself, and so if you take those 60 hours that someone's working, and if a small business owner could deduct training a new employee out of that 60 hours, it would be more like 40 hours a week, because the amount of time a small business owner has to train the revolving door of $10.10 an hour, because people making that won't be that dedicated to work. They won't show up. They often will lose their home and will be literally homeless and can't come in. When you start paying someone a living wage, you have them for a much longer time, and you do not have to train them new people all this time. It makes just practical sense to keep people. If you can keep them, you don't have the brain drain of losing these employees who then you have to train again. It makes a huge difference. And I know anyone who's run a small business or even a medium-sized business is nodding, because this is a major thing. And no one wanted to hear that at the legislature when I teed off on it. So I'm teeing off to my congregation since you're listening. And so I want to just bring up Lee's question here, which is, now we're getting into this. And I do want to follow up, because some people had questions, and Nate, maybe you can put this in the back of your head about, is it Appleseed, or like where is a lot of this data coming from? Is it state data? Where are the numbers? Because a lot of my folks will want to read about this perhaps. So I want to ask this question, but then we're going to get back to data. So Lee says, how are you reimagining, or how are we reimagining Hawaii's economy maybe diversifying or evolving moving forward, seeing maybe the chinks that we have in some of this armor? In other words, what new possibilities do you see that may not have been possible 6 months ago in this time so many of us are reimagining the way we're living?
Well, I'm really hopeful that we really start taking frontline workers and, essential workers' jobs serious, right? I don't think there was there's never been as much attention on grocery store clerks as ever before. And so, I was really hopeful that we could take this opportunity and say, hey, these people are, fighting to make ends meet. They're also fighting against this global pandemic, and they have no options. At the very least, these people should be able to go home and afford their basic needs. That's what I thought might come out of it. The political pressures have not found that to be a persuasive argument. So that's how I would reimagine it. And maybe we'll be able to come out of this again later, once the economy starts to rebound. That can be a real conversation. Unfortunately, I'm very concerned that with this massive unemployment crisis, and with terrible job prospects, that the opportunity to improve the average worker's life, it seems slim. I know it seems, I don't want to be grim, but I'm very concerned, because like I said, we had all hands on deck. The legislature came out and said the number one priority is to raise the minimum wage. They said that in January, and COVID hit and it was immediately scrapped. Like it wasn't even a question. So rather than re-up their focus and say, hey, workers need help, we can no longer sustain this, they said, hey, here's our opportunity to continue to not help them and ignore their plight. So I would hope things would improve, but unfortunately it's looking grim.
So can you say, thank you for that. I mean, it's very sad to hear. I mean, it kind of landed on my heart, to be perfectly honest, to hear all that at once. So that raises a question we'll get to in a second, but can you say a word about where you're pulling some of the data from? I know Nicole Wu does a lot of this work, and looks at a lot of this, and often is backing you up in things. But are there other, I'm sorry, and I don't mean to shorthand, Nicole Wu is an analyst an economist at Appleseed, and a lot of this is on their website that you can look at. But can you say more about some of the data you use? Is it state data? Is it other kind of studies?
Yeah, so we made sure. I mean, I know it's easy to sort of discount nonprofit groups' data, and they say, "Oh, that's just their own personal data. It's not based in fact. They're going to skew it." We haven't done that. All of this data is coming from the state, right? The state every other year puts out a study analyzing what it takes to make ends meet. What is the cost of living here in Hawaii? And they actually break it down by island. It's very specific, right? This is the cost of housing. This is the cost of food, transportation, so on and so forth. And here's the wage necessary to afford these basic needs. And so a new one just came out in December, and another one will come out in a year and a half from now. And so we're just using that. The State Department of Business, Economic Development, Tourism puts out this number, and they say, here's what it is. And so we just say the minimum wage should be at least that, which seems just basic, very, very basic to me. And then in terms of like how it's impacted our economy, the state did a study showing, workers' benefits and how their annual salaries have risen, because the minimum wage in Hawaii was $7.25 in 2014. And yeah, it was the national minimum wage, the same minimum wage in Alabama and Kentucky, and Southern Illinois, all of these places that are cheap. You can find a fully furnished, all utilities paid bedroom for $300 a month, right? Those same places that are making $7.25 is what our workers are making here. Fortunately, people who were fighting, I wasn't around fighting then. I lived here, but I wasn't part of the movement. Fortunately, they were able to get it up to 10.10. And that's a big help from Obama, because he said that that's what the minimum wage should be nationally. And so, I don't know if it's him being here or being a Democratic president, whatever the case might be, sort of put enough pressure here locally for them to say, okay, fine, we'll give you 10.10. But it was a struggle then too. I think it took them 2 years. The first year they failed, and the second year it finally passed. But again, yeah, all this data showing the evidence from moving the minimum wage from 7.25 to 10.10, so showing it was a big help, is local state data again. So there should be links on our website as well, and you can go to Appleseed. They have a great repertoire of data as well. So plenty of resources, but yeah, it's not, we're not just pulling this out of our hat here.
Yeah, Nicole Wu is a very serious person, and I work with her on a few different things, and when she starts getting going about data and the economy, it's like music. I love it. But anyway, what I wanted to kind of come to is where we're kind of closing in on the hour here, but is really kind of why I brought you on. Like, I'm glad we got through a lot of this stuff, and it's good. But as a faith tradition ourselves, we tilt at windmills a fair amount, not to be overly, Eurocentric with reference to Mena La Mancha, but how do you deal, man? Like, you're going up against, like, it feels like invisible adversaries. Everyone's on record supporting something that you want and you think is right, and then it never happens. And can you just take us through kind of, I don't want to say like your spiritual practice, but like, how are you sustaining going through this? And just please bear in mind, like, this is very helpful to hear how someone's doing that was we take, as a church and as people, we often are in minority positions about things that we want to see change. And it's very helpful to hear from people that have been doing this longer or maybe more seriously about how you really manage, if you can talk about that some.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, maybe I need to do a little more self-check-in on myself here and there too. But, you know, I, I feel very fortunate, first off, for being in the place that I am, right? I'm from Minnesota, the place in America with the worst winters. And now I get to live in Hawaii year round. Like, that is enough to keep somebody happy a lot. And I'm not a big fan of winters. So I only go visit family during the summertime because I've left for reasons. But, so it's very, and there are people who live here, who are from here, who are being exploited in their own state. And so it's easy to be like, hey, I'm down because I'm not succeeding at my goal. But at least I have a job, I'm healthy, I have good family, good friends, I'm supported, I have a roof over my head. And so it just working in the minimum wage field lends itself to being able to have perspective on things, right? Just to, at least I'm lucky I'm not a minimum wage worker, straight up. Like that's just super easy to keep my spirits up. But also, it's definitely something that I'm super passionate about. And I look at it in this way is, I'm very fortunate to be living in the year 2020. I mean, obviously the COVID and the pandemic has made things terrible, but let's just take this step back. Let's say it was the year 2019, right? I'm very fortunate to be living now, right? When people ask, oh, if you could live at any time in the world, when would it be? And I'm like, now. Imagine living 100 years ago. Imagine living 200 years ago, right? The world that we live in is better because of the people that have fought for the things that we enjoy. The 8-hour work week is something that people put their time and effort to fight for. There are people who had been fighting that for decades and maybe lived, fought, and died and never got to see the fruits of their labor, right? I feel it's 100% possible that I could fight and fight and fight and fight and lose and lose and lose and lose and lose. But the efforts that I put in today hopefully will help the movement win someday. If it's the year 2120, so be it. At least it wasn't the year 2121, right? If I can put in effort to move that timeline up, as frustrating as it might be, that's rewarding, right? It's not just getting that victory, but it's fighting the movement. It's very possible had our group not been organized 2 years ago, that we wouldn't have gotten the legislature to lead this year with a $13 minimum wage, right? 13 is terrible. There's no reason that should be the minimum wage, but it is better than 10.10. And for them to come out at the front of this year and say that was something that they were going to do is a small victory in and of itself, right? And so that's how I keep myself sane, is that win or lose, the fight itself matters. And so, I try not to get complacent, obviously, but it is nice to be able to say, just being involved is important enough. So I guess that's the short story long for you.
Yeah, I like that. Reinhold Niebuhr, a well-known theologian, pastor, philosopher, take your pick. He was a favorite of Obama's, and he said he's famous for saying, nothing truly worth doing can be accomplished in your lifetime. That it may not be happening now. And I know that sounds sad and sounds scary, but I always like to temper that with Margaret Mead, who said, never doubt what a small group of dedicated individuals can change the world, because indeed it's all that ever has. And so, so that's it's good to hear. I mean, we've covered a lot here. One of the things I always have to ask is if you had, just say you had a captive group of 20 people who are active and thoughtful and passionate about things, and who maybe have a minister who gets a little hot and bothered and about things in this world and really wants to see some change, what would you tell a group like that about your work and what we can do to help you?
Oh, wow. That's just a great question. I don't know what made you think of that, but you
yeah,
teed me
me
up.
either.
No, I think, and I'll be completely honest is, increasing our numbers is incredibly important. As grim as things are, every little bit helps. And so if this is something that you care about, if you find this to be something that you want to be involved in, please sign up for our mailing list, right? livingwagehawaii.com. And honestly, we'll send out emails and we'll ask you to do one thing probably per email, right? Just do it. It's usually pretty simple and it'll take you 5 minutes. Email your legislator or call your legislator, right? Legislators hear from all of these people. They'll get emails. They'll get a dozen emails about anti-vaccination issues every week, right? And I'm not gonna, like these are, in my opinion, niche issues, right? The minimum wage is huge, the number one Democratic priority, and they're hearing less from us than they are from these, highly funded movements, right? The unfortunate reality is we do not have the money, right? There's no, unfortunately, I mean, unless you know somebody, then send them my way. There's no philanthropy effort out there whose primary goal is raising the minimum wage in Hawaii, right? And because of that, we have people, and that's our strength. And so I cannot stress enough is getting people engaged and continuing to get them to act is of the utmost importance. I have, been putting in hours of organizing and, being frustrated, being down, moments of excitement here and there. But the connections that you can make with people are the most important way to organize, right? I have an email list of thousands of people, and I can send an email out, and you can get, 50 people to do something. You can get 10 people to do something. You can get, on a good day, maybe 100 people to do something. And it's huge, and I'm stoked. Or I could sit and I could be on my phone and I could text 50 of my friends, and I would get 48 of them to act, right? And so, I don't have all of your numbers. I'm not friends with all of you. So odds of you receiving one of my texts later is pretty low. But I would ask, please sign up for the mailing list. When you get it, say, hey, this is the one that I'm going to act on. This is the one that I'm actually going to step up. And I'm going to share this with my friends. I'm going to try to get other people involved. I'm going to be the one that sends out the text to my own friends to get them involved, because they will act. So that's what I would say is continue to stay involved. And you can always reach out to me and ask questions. It seems like this big thing, and I apologize if I scared people off with these numbers and these stats and strategies. At the end of the day, if you're just someone who cares and says, hey, every worker in Hawaii full-time should be able to afford their basic needs, period. That's why the minimum wage needs to be a living wage. You are an amazing advocate, right? That alone, being able to just say those things, you are perfect fit for who we need. You can do everything that we need from you. So just continue to stay involved and help out when you see those calls to action.
Yeah, and as someone who gets occasional text from Nate, I just want to say it does make a difference. Like I'll get the email, and then 2 hours later, I'll get a text. I'm like, all right, I'll fill out the thing, and I'll do that.
I'm the same way.
Yeah, man. And, but we have a social justice council, and I think we are going to be making some changes in the way that council works and starts getting people involved. And I think turning one text to me into a text that can go out to people interested at our congregation of, 100 or so people can make a big difference. So we'll do that. And the other thing is folks, get yourself a Living Wage Hawaii t-shirt. It is a great way to have some amazing conversations out in public with people. I wore it on Maui in a co-op, and I had this long conversation with the guy working behind the counter. His manager didn't like it, and I didn't freaking care. But he was worried I was there to start organizing the employees, which I would have been happy to do if I lived on Maui. But yeah, so there are ways to get involved, and just wearing that loud and proud in around Hawaii makes a big difference. So I just want to say, Nate, thanks so much for your time. Thanks so much for your inspiration. I know it feels weird to come on and talk about losing a few legislative battles, but you're in good company, and we appreciate the goodwill and the way you approach this. So thanks so much for coming on. Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Nice to see you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Nate.
Good to see you too, Catherine.
Oh, hey, Catherine. Yeah. And
But I appreciate being invited. I love the opportunity to discuss this. As you can tell, obviously, I'm super passionate about it. So thanks for having me on. And don't be a stranger. Feel free to reach out anytime. I really do appreciate it. So thank you.